It is so good to see everybody here. My name is Carl Kriesman. I am a professor of history at Valencia College, and for now a very long time, it has been my pleasure to work in partnership with the Winter Park Library, hosting two series, which we've done two series now for the past 3 years. One called Citizen Civics, which kind of focuses in on understanding the U.S. civic system. And I'll show you at the end a slide showing you upcoming sessions where we're going to look at the Constitution. We're going to kind of just walk our way through it almost line by line. And so that focuses on those. The opposite of that is called Past Meets Present. And Past Meets Present meaning just some basic general history topics. And we kind of look at a lot of different things. And actually, Jeremy and I were just talking. You may know next year is our 250th anniversary from the Declaration of Independence. So it's kind of a big one. We like those round numbers. He and I were surmising maybe it's because we have 10 fingers, and so working in tens feels good for us. But regardless, you honor not your 19th anniversary, but your 20th. That's the one that kind of sticks out. In any case, so we're thinking, okay, we have to look at some things next year to do that will be focused on the Declaration. But we're always kind of working our way through a variety of topics that are on history generally. We don't do a lot of battles, I will say that on the outset, for various reasons. I actually love military history, but I think it's because I love military history that I'm always a little bit nervous because it's not everybody's cup of tea, which is totally fair, and we try to be all over the place. But this year, as you may know, and if you saw as you came in, is our library celebrating Jane Austen's major anniversary, and we are doing it in partnership with the Jane Austen Society of North America. And so they've been putting on all year long a whole host of events for children, for grown-ups. There's been dancing, there's been art, there's dressing up. And they said, would you be interested in tying some of your talks? I'm like, oh, absolutely, because I like Jane Austen. I like this movie, and this show in particular. I will confess from the outset, it's a movie to me, it's not a book. So if you're a Jane Austen super fan and you're the reader, you already think less of me. Just like I think less of people who only know Lord of the Rings from the movies, because if you don't read Tolkien, you've not been there. But that's just me being snooty about an author I love. I do like Jane Austen. And so it's been a great pleasure to work with them. And so this month, so in 2 months we're going to do something connected to, my mind is totally blank, but it's the one they did in March and April. So we're off months in that case. But this one is the Book of Persuasion, which is what we're doing. So every 2 months, the books are all up there. If you didn't sign in, normally we're kind of back and forth on we need you to, we don't need you to. But I really want you to, on your way out, make sure you sign in. That you can also get this handy dandy little card that has a QR code on the back that tells you more about the Jane Austen Society. And then there's some cards you can get up there that have like stickers, and there's things you can do. There's just a whole fun celebratory thing. One of the many things the library does. I think from that same sign-in, trust me, we're going to get to the battle. From that same sign-in, but if you haven't, there's another way. I really encourage you to be on the library's mailing list, because they'll emailing list, because they'll send you things that are coming, that are happening. So just as another example of what an amazing library we have, we are one of, I just saw this, and I'm going to probably get it right. We're one of a select number, I think it's 50. We're one of a select number of libraries across the entire country next year that are going to get to host a special traveling exhibit from the National Holocaust Museum. So obviously my ears perked up when I heard that, because even though it's the 250th and we're looking at I don't know that we'll use all 12 months, and so I'm like, hey, when are they going to be here? And I've got a good friend who's an amazing expert in Holocaust studies, so I'm thinking, okay, I need to get that guy here, I need to work all that out. So the library is amazing, and it's been a great pleasure of mine to partner with. So I'm putting this card over here. If they run out, you can have mine. It's right here. QR code is very nice. It'll kind of work our way through. So the Battle of Waterloo. Now, close-eyed fans or of people who've come here, you may have noticed when I walk around, I have on the Battle of Gettysburg tie. There's a reason. One, because it's my cool battle tie that I like a lot. I like wearing historical ties. But there are some really close similarities, I think, between the Battle of Waterloo as it is in our imagination and in our historical memory, and the Battle of Gettysburg. And so we're kind of going to walk through some of those as we go along. The thing I would say first is that I've always been a fan of the French Revolution, so my initial academic work as a graduate student was in the French Revolution, but from a British point of view. So really tying into Persuasion, my study was on a British naval sea captain who eventually rose up to the rank of admiral and was in close connection with Wellington, who we're going to see later in his work in the Peninsula Campaign. And so I've always been fascinated with that aspect. As a kid, I was an avid little war gamer. Some of you are old enough to know and remember or understand the historical wargaming company called Avalon Hill. And long before we had computers to do this kind of thing, we had ways we could wargame on tabletop. Waterloo is one of those games that often gets out there because it's in our imagination as this kind of fanciful moment. Historians like to do a lot of things we call looking at the ahistorical moment or the counterfactual. So in other words, we think, well, what would have happened had Alexander the Great not died? What would have happened because he was so young? If he lived 20 more years, what happens? What would have happened if the Persians had won the second phase, the major phase where Xerxes invades Greece in the Greco-Persian Wars? What happens? It's not like the end of the world. And so it gives us a chance. This is going to bug me all day. It gives us a chance. I had it set up, but the more I move, it gives us a chance to kind of think out loud. And in the thinking in the counterfactual, we come back to the real and helps us kind of gain assessment. Waterloo is one of those moments because everybody's like, oh, what if Napoleon had won? I will say in criticism, I think a lot of times people are more fancifully thinking in a I wish he had won. And of course, that's kind of like wishing the Germans had won the Battle of the Bulge, because Napoleon's the bad guy in the story. Now, it's more complicated than that, but just pointing that out. And so, back to my tie, a lot of people in Civil War history, or a lot of Americans more, well, anyway, they put Gettysburg as the most important Civil War battle. It's not. The Battle of Antietam is the most important Civil War battle, and I've taught on that. If you go to my website page, and it goes to it'll say Past Me Present, so you'll see the connection. And you go to the playlist, you'll see a Civil War section, and you'll find the Battle of Antietam in there, and I explain all that. But in our minds, Gettysburg is this moment because, well, what if Lee had won? And then there's books that have been written about it. Not a chance. Lee could have won that battle and a couple of more. The South's not winning that war without several other things happening, which were highly unlikely. Waterloo's the same way. Napoleon could have won at Waterloo, and it's not changing anything. So I'm going to try to explain that to you as we walk our way through. As I've said many times before, if you have a question, sometimes the best time to ask it is right then. I will try to have a Q&A at the end, but don't hesitate to go, hang on. Also, if you're someone who is a Waterloo expert and you know, we're not going to get down to the tactical unit level pretty much. So feel free to go, I'm really disappointed because he didn't mention this guy's name. You may know more than I know. I'll also say my French pronunciation is poor. I'm just telling you that on the front. But I'm going to try because some of these I think are important to do. But if you are a French native speaker or you're from France or you studied there a lot, you'll be like, that was terrible. That's not how you say it. So I'm asking your forgiveness on the front side. You can't do Napoleon without getting through the French Revolution. Also, if you go back to there and you do that, you can find the French Revolution playlist that kind of walks through. We did 2 series on how we get to the French Revolution. This is my way of telling the French Revolution in summary at the end, and that the French Revolution is a wonderful way of exploring how revolutions, 1, can never be controlled, and 2, are constantly moving between what we consider like left and right, the 2 basic wings of what is happening in a revolution when they're thinking out things. If you thought about our U.S. Constitution, you could divide the men in the room between sort of a left and right in what they were looking for. Events transpired in the French Revolution, moving now. My classroom, I have a gigantic whiteboard, so I put this there. So just think of this moving this direction and just kind of moving left, because most of the time in our minds we think of left as being more progressive. That's just the way we talk about it. Don't get thoughtful about our current day progressives and conservatives or left and right, but just thinking it's constantly moving. And I explain all this, and why this matters to us is because it doesn't stop there. Because of thermodynamic reaction, you can sort of see it. The arrow kind of does a little twist because it's coming down here, meaning they hit the wall of the thermodynamic reaction, they come back. Now, the moment they come back, this is the moment we pick up Napoleon in the process. So I'm going to kind of walk you through that, because ultimately it's going to lead all the way over to here to where we have an empire. And from a kind of thoughtfulness, if you think about the French Revolution, you kind of go, okay, so here we have a monarchy, and we can loosely say there's a revolution to get rid of a single all-powerful leader that ultimately led us back to a single all-powerful leader. It's like, okay, somebody's confused somewhere, and we explain all that when we walk through the French Revolutionary story. In any case, This gets us to his coronation, and from his coronation, it's ultimately what's going to lead us to the Battle of Waterloo. So let me kind of walk you through how we get there. Kind of go quickly here, because we do want to spend most of the time looking at the battle itself. Napoleon's fame starts, unsurprisingly, on the battlefield. He's the one who successfully, as a young captain, saves the port of Toulon and saves the French fleet, and basically eliminates the first effort of the British to try and eliminate or impact the French Revolution. From there, he's in Paris at the moment when there's a kind of a takeover moment, which gives us his very famous whiff of grape shot moment that sort of sets him into the mindset of the political leaders as someone. They give him an army. He goes down into the Italian northern part to fight off the Austrians, successfully does, kind of lightning fast. And before long, the entire peninsula, which in the minds of a good Frenchman, the Italian peninsula is just an extension of France. If you ask a good Frenchman, they'll say, well, that should be our Florida. And that it's its own nation bugs them. Obviously, if you talk to a good Italian, they're like, we were here in Rome long before you. But in the minds of a good Frenchman who links themselves back to the Franks, they're like, that should be ours. So they were really happy when he pulled all that off. Eventually, Napoleon and the French realized, Great Britain, they're going to be our biggest problem. How can we get to them? This would be a whole theme. If we were doing a study of Napoleon or the Napoleonic Wars, we'd spend more time here. And the French were already in that mindset. Britain had already made this transition the century before to realizing our security long term will depend solely on having the world's strongest navy. So they're already there, and this war, this period of say 20 years, will really demonstrate to them of what's the most important thing for them. So Napoleon's like, well, I can't go there, where can I go? And he started having visions of Alexander the Great, and he's like, I'll go to Egypt. He does, is successful generally on land, takes Malta, that's kind of ticks off the Russians, but he gets there and pulls it off. It's his first moment when he runs, well, he doesn't, but his navy runs headlong into Horatio Nelson. That doesn't go well for the French. And you think, okay, that's the end of the story, Napoleon looks bad, but instead, at that same time when he kind of comes back to France, good PR, he comes back successfully, although he left his army there basically to die in the Middle East. He's hailed as a conquering hero, and he gets drafted in. And if you go back to that chart, or you go look at the study that I did on the French Revolution, one of the things that comes out of the French Revolution is this idea that from the moment the king calls the Assembly of Notables, you could basically argue that they run through about 10 different governments and 7 different constitutions in the time period in which we had 2, but once we got the second one, we stuck with it, with a few alterations along the way. That doesn't make us better than the French necessarily, but it's part of that whole story. And it shows you part of how that journey, I will call it a chaotic journey through the French Revolution, leads to this moment where there's this consistent transition which never allows you to get settled. You don't know what the rules are if we're writing an entirely new constitution every year, year and a half. And ultimately that does lead to him being elected the emperor. It is important in his case, it's also important in Hitler's defense, to say they were elected. They didn't just take over. They were chosen. Now they did things after they were chosen that we could arguably say was dictatorial, but at least in their minds, and Napoleon for sure thought this, I was voted in. I was voted in twice. So back off all those dictator claims, Kriesman. You can't say that about me. I'm just an innocent young guy who became good at doing what I do. And he starts off in a period of really focusing on domestic change. One of the things I ask my students to do, and you can think about this too if you know your French Revolution, is to consider, is Napoleon the culmination of the ideals of the revolution, or is he the repudiation of the ideals of the revolution? I'm not sure there's a great answer for that, but that shows you the complexities of it. If you stopped right here and just looked at this, I think the evidence would be on he's the culmination, he's the fulfillment. He pulls it off. Poor kid makes good, goes in, makes a tremendous amount of change, some of which are still with us today in France from a sense of domestic structure, things Napoleon set up. He was well known for being someone who just consistently worked and worked and worked. If you know the music Hamilton, you know, one of the points when they're talking about the Federalist Papers, the character who plays Aaron Burr tells a story like, how did Hamilton write like 60 of the papers? The man is nonstop, right? That was Napoleon. Napoleon and Hamilton have a lot of similarities. There's a whole study right there in the comparativeness between Alexander Hamilton and Napoleon as somebody who, notice how we always call Napoleon by his first name. I do it. You may be wanting me to call him Bonaparte, but I'll just go with Napoleon because it's just the way it is in my head. But he would often 2 hours sleep, 3 hours sleep, and then just be churning. To make that happen, he got peace with the British. And for a moment, people thought, okay. And then it went sideways. That's another one of the questions relative to Napoleon is well, what happened? Was he just a greedy, dictatorial mind who wanted to dominate the entire continent? There's some evidence for that. Was he, so Hitler has the same kind of moment. There's a couple of moments where Hitler has things secured and could have hit the brakes and then played the peacekeeper that he tried to play from 38 to 40 or 38 to 39 into the Polish War. He doesn't. And one of the reasons we typically talk about is that Hitler realized his own election was fragile, and if the German people had time to think, they might turn against him. And his economy was also really tied into military expenditures. So when you think about Germany, Hitler's position is really one of, I have to keep fighting. I can't let there be peace, kind of a thing. Plus his own psychotic megalomania, right? With Napoleon, it's not clear. The economy is not like that. There's no sense of there being a French economy that needs military expenditures. It's not sure exactly where it goes. Now, if he were here, he would say, it wasn't my fault. You see up there, Great Britain declared war on us. But of course, that became out of the Treaty of Amiens that Napoleon didn't really uphold his end of what was on the paper relative to trade. So in any case, the British felt like, we have to do this. So the war peace was only for a brief moment. It's so brief that I don't really think of the Napoleonic Wars as being 03 to 15. I take them back to 97 to 15 because it's such a it is a year, a little more than a year of official peace. But regardless, it's an in and out kind of thing. And so then this leads us into a whole series of wars. Now, from the moment of the French Revolution predating Napoleon, which is another reason why I think it's important to think in those terms of the longer span of wars, and you could actually extend it back to, I think, 92, different European nations felt like they needed to stop it. The Revolution, the French, Napoleon, and so they worked together. And so those are known as the different coalitions. We would call them more broadly from a World War I, World War II perspective, the Allies, who were fighting the bad guy. Who's the bad guy? The bad guy here is France, kind of a thing. So the whole series of battles, and Napoleon is quite successful. So he got about a 5-year run where he doesn't lose. And he's very successful, really develops an aura of invincibility for Napoleon. His last thing is looping Russia into an alliance. So if you look at this map here, and this map's a little unfortunate for several reasons, but here's one. This is showing at the time of the battle. This would be more appropriate for this to be the same pink as Prussia and Austria. So at this moment, except for the Ottomans and Portuguese, everybody's in his circle. Everybody's with him, including up here, the Danes and the Norwegians, in the Baltic up there. So he's got a moment where he pulls all this off. And in that setting, he then begins to think, instead of peace, how do I deal with these guys? And so then he concludes a correct ideology, but did not have the ability to pull it off. What he concludes is we need to use economic means. And so he begins a whole system of things, and there's sort of a tit for tat between England and France. And this is what's going to ultimately lead the United States to the War of 1812, because it's all connected in here, where we don't like what they're doing and it involves our trade. But the short version is they go at it with each other. It'll be the exact same thing. To a lesser degree, Spain tried to do. It's certainly what England is doing to France in economic battle. And then it'll be all what happens in World War I and World War II. In all the naval stuff that's happening is really about an economic side of things. And so his continental system is put in place. Now, I've always said, when I look at the continental system, what it really betrays is Napoleon's own lack of understanding about capitalism. But then I also hasten to say to people, remind yourselves, capitalism was a new idea. Adam Smith wrote Wealth of Nations in 1776, so 200th anniversary of that's coming up also. That's part of why the American Revolution happens, because we were fighting for the concept of capitalism before it had a name. We would just talk about free trade and let us go where we want to go, and I'm John Hancock, and I'm going to get sugar from whoever I want to get sugar from, leave me alone. And the British were like, no, you're John Hancock the smuggler, because you're breaking our economic laws by bringing in French sugar. So you can look at the American Revolution at one level as a battle of definitions, but in the defense of the British, nobody knew that word. So neither does Napoleon. And so his efforts here will fall apart. By the way, so will Jefferson's, who makes the foolish decision to try to embargo Great Britain, the world's superpower trader, and France, and of course all it does is devastate American ports. Yet another reason why I don't like Jefferson. If you've been here before, you know that. So ultimately, the Russians will be like, this is not a good plan for us. They try it for like 3 years, and it brings economic decay to the ports. In other words, we saw this when the pandemic hit. When all of a sudden you lost the going flow of trade, one of the places that suffer are all the port cities, because there's no longer the in and out of the trade and the ships and all that kind of thing, right? Well, where are the port cities? Yes, England has some, but they've got trade with themselves. They've got trade with us. They've got trade with Canada. They've got trade with Australia. They've got trade with India. They've got trade with Africa. So who really suffered were the continental ports. And so Alexander is like, yeah, this ain't working. I'm out. And Napoleon's I'm going to teach you a lesson. And so he determines to go and have a war. And of course, we learn from Princess Bride, the most classic blunder is to fight a land war in Asia. Although it'd be better stated, like, don't fight in Russia, right? Because they've got a secret weapon. They've got a secret general, General Winter, who comes to their aid. And he's always helped them win almost all of their battles. But he does it. He marches in there, and it doesn't go well. What Napoleon thought would happen is that he would fight a battle with the Russians. Remember, he's not lost. He'll win, and in the ensuing peace negotiations with the Tsar, he will demand that he join back in the alliance like a good boy. That'll be the end. What he never anticipated was the Russians deciding, we just won't fight you. And we'll go further and further and further and further back, retreating backwards. And along the way, we're going to burn everything down on this route. Eventually, when they got to outside of Moscow, they do fight the Battle of Borodino. It's a bloody stalemate. Technically, it's a French win, but it's not the battle he really wanted. He thought there'd be more days of battle. The Russian general's like, yeah, no, we can't do that. So he just retreated further. Napoleon enters Moscow. Now, he's stalled along the way. Makes the same mistake Hitler makes with his German armies, except in Hitler's case, he didn't stall. He just got so successfully wandered around doing other things rather than shooting straight for Moscow, which he could have and should have. And so Napoleon rolls into Moscow, and the Russians leave, and it burns to the ground. It's not clear who did it, if there was like an order, if it was the army. Some scholars believe it literally was just average, regular Russian families saying, well, you're not going to have my house. And they burned it to the ground themselves. And so fire started all over the city, literally the next day. And so all of a sudden, the French troops are trying to put the fire out, and it just, they sort of do, but they don't. Then, instead of Napoleon going, let's get out of here, this ain't going to work because winter's coming, he lingers around for a month, assuming Alexander will come and have a treaty with him. He doesn't. And so finally, Napoleon's like, well, I guess I should go home. Except now, the Russian armies had a month of renewal. They've got more troops, and they chased them down. And they were trying to go, so if you think of like Moscow, let me go back to this map. So here's Moscow, right? So obviously there's more than one way in, and what they had kind of done is kind of come up here and gone this way. So Napoleon wisely thought, since that's all been burned, we'll go this way. But this battle here, which I will not try to state, here we go, this one, basically the Russian army will stop the French, the Allied army, from going south and forces them back onto the burned out part. So the retreat becomes a rout as they're making their way back. There's not enough food, and the army is slowly dwindling along. Now all this again is just helping us set up, getting us to Waterloo, because when 3 slides ago, 2008, he's victorious. He's never been defeated. It's not like it was nip and tuck. I mean, he was just constantly winning. But yet you and I know we're talking about this last battle, which is some last gasp. Well, why in the world do we even have that? He's got to be defeated. What's leading him to this defeat is this. Now, noted, at the same time this is happening, on the peninsula, on the Iberian Peninsula. Remember on that map, Portugal had not been included. That's because the British had come to their aid using their superior navy. This is where my guy gets involved with Wellington in like 09 and 10, I think it is. And so the British helped kind of trap significant numbers of French troops in the Iberian Peninsula, while of course the Spanish rebels themselves are rising up in their own revolts all across the country. And so eventually the French start losing, and because Napoleon's taken this massive army away, there's not even enough really reinforcements to send to Iberia. So as they're marching their way through Spain, as he's coming back, all of a sudden there's rumors that the British army at the Pyrenees Mountains. And so they're about to cross into France, and he's not any nearby. So this is turning into a real disaster. In December, as you can see, he gets word that there had been an attempted coup in Paris. So much like he did in Egypt, he just leaves the army, takes some of the Imperial Guard with him, some cavalry protection, boom, they take off for Paris. Because he wants to get back, because there's no phones, right? So as far as the people in Paris know, he's dead. And he wants to know, I'm not dead. So he shows back up, puts down the problem, begins raising armies, but now he's in trouble. The Russian army is on its way, the British army is crossing the mountains. And this right here, I love this, a very famous chart that many people have seen before, in which it shows the strength by graph of the Allied army, the 600,000, on its way out, and then went on its way back. So you can kind of see what happens. Now, France is still the most populous nation. So he could rebuild, but any of you who know anything about military stuff knows it's not just the numbers that he lost, but he lost the veterancy, right? So you take people who are your veterans and then you fritter them away in a bad decision of battle. Even if you have the same numbers later, you don't have the same quality in what's happening. Napoleon knows this, and he knows he's in trouble, and all this will ultimately lead to what we call the Battle of the Nations, or the Battle of Leipzig, in which all these armies, so the Prussians and the Austrians will leave his alliance, join the Russians, who they will, kind of Russia will think we saved you guys, and they'll all start rolling this way, and then, where's my little map here? I'll come back to this, I promise. So here you can see Wellington making his way over the Pyrenees Mountains. So you've got all these armies kind of making their way in. So at the Battle of Leipzig in October, he's outnumbered. There's two major armies that are on both sides of him. So here you can see the city of Leipzig, and he really is outnumbered, not fully 2-to-1, 1.5-to-1, but he's going to be unable to hold this off. And actually, they have him surrounded here, but they're able to kind of break through, push those guys back, and they escape that way. And the retreat basically becomes a rout. And even though he didn't technically lose at Borodino, when you put Borodino and Leipzig together, in the minds of the key decision makers, the invincibility aura had been broken. It's like, oh, we can beat this guy. So now the race is on to Paris. Napoleon's in trouble. There's some possibility, and we'll lean on this when we get to, here in a second, Vienna. One of the challenges that Packingham, this is the same Packingham who will lose his life in New Orleans, fighting in 1815 for the Battle of War of 1812, but he's the brother-in-law of Wellington, and he will say, I think we can win right now, but it'll depend on what Napoleon's able to play out. Remember, Napoleon at this point is married to a daughter of the Habsburg family, meaning the Habsburgs, the Holy Roman Empire, Vienna, right? So you don't know these different, all through these studies, through these 15 years, Austria and Prussia in particular, but Russia also, and the smaller states as well, have been in and out, as far as allied with France, not allied with France, in and out, and in and out, and in and out. So in the British mind, who have constantly been at war, they've never gone out, except for the Treaty of Amiens. They're like, we know we're stable, but we don't know if we can count on anybody else to stick with us in these battles. So Packingham is just noting, and Wellington is agreeing with him, that we should win as long as there's not something that happens whereby somehow Napoleon's able to swing somebody to his side, right? Well, he won't, and ultimately this will all lead into they're making their way into Paris through the early spring of 1814. He's trying to have those negotiations. And so finally in December, the main powers make this declaration where they say, hey, look, we're not at war with France. We're at war with Napoleon. He's the guy we're at war with. So you hear that in modern times where people will say, we're not fighting these people, we're fighting that. But still those people are the ones who are going to get blown up. But anyway, you get the picture there. And so Napoleon's hoping to find a way out. He won't find a way out. And so in April, he'll be first the French Senate will say, we're going to try to save ourselves. And we save ourselves by sacrificing you. So in April, he's forced to abdicate. So he abdicates away, right? So this takes him to the island of Elba, which we'll look at more in a second. But this is where I want to take time to make sure we kind of set this now in context with Jane Austen, right? Because Miss Austen's writing now, at the time we're talking, right? So this has all been going on. There's nobody alive in England who's not aware of this. I don't know that we get this as much in our day, but we have to think, particularly from a British perspective, on the British Isles. I think it would have been true also on the continent, but for the British Isles, the Napoleonic experience is easily equivalent to how we perceive the threat from Germany and Hitler. So be careful not to romanticize because it's further back there. Napoleon's, he's kind of cute, he's short, there's a weird hand thing. I kind of like him, maybe, sort of. No. To the British, this guy is a massive, massive threat. They made nursery rhymes that still last, that have words that are taken from Bonaparte to connect, to scare the children. They just knew at any moment bad things could happen. That's why the 20th century also, by the way, is so fascinating, because we always think of France as on the good guy side. In France, you got to paint them in black. They're the bad guys for about 200 years in European history. And the Germans in 1914 were quite frustrated to find out, wait, are you saying we're the bad guys? We're not the bad guys, it's France. Everybody knows France, the danger country. So cast in your mind when Miss Austen is writing, this is kind of like, oh my gosh, the war's over, Vite, kisses, kiss the Navy guy on the street kind of thing. I mean, it's an amazing kind of moment. And so she starts writing. Now it's the next year in 1815, but it's the exact day that it was noted, now this is after Waterloo, but it's the exact day that the British papers said Bonaparte has sailed, meaning he's been sailed into exile, then at St. Helena, which is down in the Atlantic, so far, far, far away. Okay? And so there's this picture of her writing, and this turns out to be her last completed novel. Two of her brothers were in the Navy, and most literary scholars who focus on Austen will tell us that it was her way to do an homage to the British Navy, kind of including the key male character as this captain returning from the success of the British Navy, holding us together through the whole time of the war. So the novel is set in that summer. Now, of course, her audience already knows Waterloo's happened. So they're all kind of reading when they read this from her later in 1815. And of course, in that moment between Elba and then Waterloo, all the other nations were doing what we did in 1919 and in 1945, decommissioning. You're bringing people home, you're helping them find places. And for, the Navy in particular, they're coming back sailing, and if you were somebody who was an officer in particular, you're figuring out where you want to live, you're figuring out, can I buy this house, should I settle down? And if I'm settling down, I'm thinking about a wife. So in the story, Wentworth, but this is from the Netflix adaptation, which I give 2 thumbs up. It's really good. I like it. You have to ask the expert if it's good, though, because she'd be the one that knows it there. He and the heroine had a previous relationship. And then there was aspects related to her family, not her choice, but her family's choice, about, well, he's in the Navy, don't think this is a good idea. And so there's a whole bunch of other things. I think socially he's beneath her. And at that point, so when he comes back, he's successful. And so there's all this kind of back and forth that kind of set in the motion. And it's a lovely little story in the process. Spoiler alert, they get together. Because that doesn't always happen in her stories. They get together. And what's really fascinating, what I really love about this is at the very end of the novel, she writes this. And I love this phrase that she's saying the heroine will have to pay the tax of quick alarm. Beautiful turn of phrase. None of us would ever say it that way. Meaning what? he's still a naval captain. And if a new thing happens, he will have to go off to sea. Now, she's not writing it to say Waterloo, because again, it happened so quickly. The British Navy, they didn't do anything. It was all an army type of thing related to Waterloo. The British Navy is going to have a very big role to play making the world safe post Napoleonic Wars. So he still may be called off to war. But she's able to sort of set in the imagination of the reader, oh yes, Waterloo. So the poor lovers get together, and then within moments, obviously, Waterloo's going to happen, and it scares everybody when Bonaparte comes back. And so, kind of a thing. Such a great sentence, right? The dread of a future war, all that could dim her sunshine. So, everybody good? All right, so let's get to the war, to the battle. First, we need to set in the diplomatic setting that's happening. All right? So there's two treaties that are signed. The first one's the one Napoleon participates in, and you can see the British are like, we don't like this. This is not very good. This introduces you to Lord Castlereagh, who will be the lead diplomat. He's not the only one, but he's the lead diplomat related to what the British are going to do. And Castlereagh's got some vision. And you can see in this first treaty, Fontainebleau, they're allowing Napoleon to carry the title emperor. He goes to Elba and he kind of lands like, your emperor is here. And he is allowed to govern. When he goes to St. Helena later, he's there as a prisoner. But when he goes to Elba, he's there like, this is my little kingdom. So in the minds of the British, that's a really bad precedent to set. You're allowing him to think something we shouldn't let him think. So the British said, we're not signing that. Napoleon's sent off by ship, and then they sign the Treaty of Paris after he's gone. And in this one, Castlereagh now is clearly involved. Napoleon is not really stripped of title, but they basically go through the process of saying there's a legitimate government in France. It's the Bourbon family who was on the throne before the revolution began. They'll still be on the throne. They're going to restore the borders back to 1792 levels rather than that expanded level where they were. And we're going to meet in Vienna. Now, this meeting in Vienna is really, really important in the process because it's the first major diplomatic global thing since Westphalia, over 140 years before, something like that. And so, when you look at diplomatic history, Westphalia kind of stands as this moment that sets in motion what we consider the emergence of the modern age. Like everything modern is usually tied to the end of the 30 Years' War, which has been settled by Westphalia, right? And so we look at like what they do at Westphalia. So one of the things that you say they did was that everybody participated, got to come to the story, sit at the table for conversation. So that's pretty unique. Now we got to be careful because then when you go to Versailles in 1919, it's always held up in contrast to Vienna. And one of the things that's pointed out at Versailles is that the leading three powers all went off in seclusion, blew off their allies, blew off all the other smaller countries, which is why we typically say, or I certainly say, Versailles was a failed treaty. And now that we're 106 years on, it's proven to be the disaster of the 20th century. We have the problems of the 20th century, in my opinion, anywhere you want to look on the map today, and I can show you that blame starts with Versailles. But that's usually done in a way that honors Vienna. And we have to be careful here because they didn't, as they did do at Westphalia, they didn't get all 30, 40, 50, or as you can see up here, 200 nations in a room having a conversation like our UN. They still, all the heavyweights, went off in seclusion and had their initial meetings. But notice what they do here. This is important. Setting the stage for why this becomes a really good diplomatic moment is they ultimately choose to include the French. And that's where the difference really lies with 1919. The Germans were never included. Neither, by the way, were the Russians, the Chinese, the Japanese, which of course explains why we ended up in World War II. But here they do, but they don't do it willingly. They do it because the French diplomatic corps is going to be led by this man, Talleyrand, who has a fascinating story. I mean, he's like his own, we need a whole story just on Talleyrand. It's too much to get into. But he plays both sides. He's in with the revolutionaries, he's in with the monarchy. He participates in our story. He's a thorn in George Washington's side. He's at the center of the XYZ affair. I mean, this guy's like Benjamin Franklin. He's in everything. These four guys, Notice Alexander will actually lead, if you check it, there is a Russian diplomat, but the Tsar basically ran his own show. He's there. None of the other main leaders for their nation are there. Well, the Habsburg is there, but basically Metternich does everything for Austria. Talleyrand is able to ingratiate himself in through a variety of means, including noting that there are, 4 other signatories of the Treaty of Paris, like Spain, Sweden, and Portugal, who aren't in the room, so they should be in the room. So he's kind of working his way in to kind of make this happen in the process. Now, this is all playing into Waterloo because Napoleon's watching. He's got spies and friends in all these places, okay? And the negotiations then are just as tricky as they are today. When you see the United States and China arguing about things, you see attempts to kind of get Russia and Ukraine to the table and they won't, and what are we doing and how are we fitting into this, and Gaza and Israel, don't go, these current leaders are dummies. Say to yourself, same song we've had multiple times before. And it just shows the complexities of humans working together, whether in individuals, some of you lived in an HOA, or whether it's working for organizations, in which case you're kind of representing a bunch of people as a nation. So in the process of their discussions, these big 4 begin to find areas that they're most frustrated with. And the main thing that was happening was that there were questions being asked about the Central European lands. So you've got the Prussians and the Austrians, who of course could be friends to defeat the French, but they really were rivals of one another. And through Napoleon's own diplomatic efforts, you already had a budding concept of a place called Germany, which doesn't exist on the map. And Prussia and Austria are like, we're leading that. And meanwhile, because previously the land we know of as Poland had been erased from the map by the Russians, the Austrians, and the Prussians in a series of agreements, there are Polish leaders who are in Vienna going, we'd like to have our land back. We'd like to be a state again. So that leads to a whole series of debates in the process. And so you've got all these issues that are kind of percolating in the story, and that's Napoleon's moment. He gets word that there's division occurring about some of the lands in Germany, about Poland, that the different states are, eyeing each other, there's tensions involved, and he's like, now's my moment. So as you can see, in February, he basically decides, I'm going to make my break. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to sail back to France and see if I can pull off a return to power, and then see what happens from there in the process. So he does. He takes a small fleet of 700 ships, very small, 4 cannons, and rolls in. And this leads to a whole series of kind of very interesting moments. What he doesn't anticipate or fails to acknowledge could happen is that his return did not, as he hoped, help divide the 5 nations into something that some of them might work with him, but it actually galvanized and united those nations, because remember that one treaty we looked at, who are they at war with? They're at war with Napoleon. Again, in their mind, the easiest way for us is imagine Hitler does not die, and say in late 45 he pops up somewhere and he's galvanized a whole group of SS troops around, and we've all decommissioned and we've all started going home, and all of a sudden there's 20,000 German troops somewhere maybe in the Alps of Austria with Hitler alive, and he starts making speeches about a greater Germany. I think most of our parents or grandparents who would have been alive at the time would have been horrified with that, and it would have freaked everybody out. And they would have been thinking, oh my gosh, we have to work together. Forget our battles over East and West Germany. Let's go. Does that make sense for everybody? So again, we have to get Napoleon in the right frame of mind here in the story. The French government, the Bourbon family, sends troops to catch him. They know where he's at. They send troops to catch him. He famously bared his chest. Could be apocryphal, but he famously bares his chest and says, I'm here because I love France. The first one of you who hates me, shoot me. And the soldiers started weeping, and they all ran to join him, and then they start hugging the other 700, and all of a sudden he's got friends on his side. And that will continue all through a long march till he gets to Paris here in March. Marshal Ney will be somebody who swore before he left, I will kill Napoleon myself. And in the moment he gets there, he's like, oh, my dear, Emperor, and he bends the knee, and he's all in, right? And so Napoleon, he had this swagger, right? He had this aura around him. He had this sway. And he gets there, obviously the Bourbon family runs, they get the heck out. And in Vienna, they're like, oh shoot. But they're not bereft of things to do. So Wellington's in Vienna. He had come to join Castlereagh. And he immediately heads north because he had a British allied army up near Brussels. So he's like, okay, I'm gonna go up there. He's not too stressed because he goes to a party, but we'll come back to that. The Russians are basically East Germany, Poland with their massive army. They're heading home, but they're close enough. The Prussians are there near Brussels, and the Austrians, they have their army basically in Vienna. In other words, like I said at the beginning, to me, when you get to this point, it's impossible to construct a way in which even if he wins at Waterloo, it changes the ultimate story. The British, for sure, he could have destroyed every British person and killed Wellington. The British, they've been in this thing for 20 years. They're not backing down now. There's zero evidence that they would have backed down just because they lost a small army under Wellington. The Russians are for sure coming, no matter what Prussia and Austria does, and Prussia will fight from the beginning, and so their army getting ultimately destroyed, oh, they were going to reload and join with Russia, and Austria's in the mix also. So, in any case, this is setting up the story of where we're trying to go. Now, Napoleon does find some initial success in his structuring. He is able to raise an army. One of the reasons he came back, which is on our previous slide, was that he had noted or had been told that as prisoners of wars from his soldiers, prisoners of war, had returned home, they had not been greeted with love and open arms by the Bourbon government. So he knew he had soldiers who would be loyal to him and glad to have him back to lead them. So he's able to raise that army. He still raises a larger army. They're in the process of raising more troops. So don't think about this number here that he goes into battle at Waterloo as the only French troops. There's a French army that's going down towards Switzerland. They'll actually fight a battle with some Austrians. It's kind of a little bit of a draw. There's a couple of other armies that are being built. So there is a sense in which he would have had the ability to raise more troops. And there are historians who will say I'm wrong, and the group who says what I said is wrong, that have Wellington, if he wins Waterloo, then you probably have several more years of warfare, and perhaps he would have been successful in staying on the throne. So I'm not in their camp, but when you listen to them, part of their argument is the fact that he was raising more troops. So, that if he wins, it's not like that's his only army. And so he gets here to here, and then he basically begins to head down. So the British are over here, and the Prussians are over here. This is Blücher, there's Wellington. And so the Prussians are here, and he thinks, Napoleon, I can fight them at Ligny here and Quatre Bras here, and if I do, I can successfully divide their armies. So their two armies separately I can take on. That's what he's thinking in the process. So he's going to do that. Now, he moves quickly, more quickly than people had imagined. So neither the Prussian army nor the British army were in battle line formation. They were basically in a state of rest and of reorganization and of coming together. And famously, the night that Napoleon makes his move to cross the river and go into battle, Wellington is at a ball with the Duchess of Richmond, and then he's told, oh, guess what, Napoleon's on the move, and Wellington's kind of like, oh my gosh, I've lost 24 hours, I have to go. And so that happens on June 16th, Marshal Ney attacks at Quatre Bras up here. And he demonstrates something that will happen for the French throughout this. There's multiple moments when the French leadership, including Napoleon, will not move as quickly as they were famously known for. So if you go to the Civil War battles, and particularly if you study Stonewall Jackson, but others, in the 1860s, the Napoleonic campaigns were studied at depth because it's the last war we had. So people looked at them, they were fascinated. And one of the things that Stonewall in particular really wanted to emulate was what you see particularly in the first battle I told you in northern Italy, but consistently for Napoleon, which was the use of speed rather than the need for extreme numbers. In other words, typically, or at least early on, Napoleon would win by outmaneuvering against his enemy who often had more troops. And by outmaneuvering, he gets into a better position for the battle that was fought, so he could win that battle even against superior numbers. Remember, I've told you before, you've been here, we looked at some of the battles. Military stuff is basically a math exercise. How many do you have? How many do we have? But then there's factors that get played in, and there's lots of different factors. The technology that they might have, the type of weapons they might have, the veterancy, as I told you before, that might be at the game, and then the terrain. If you watch any Civil War movies, they're always talking about this is good ground, or this is not. They have the good ground. We shouldn't fight there. The ground's not moral. What they're talking about is that this is an advantage for what this army is preparing to do based on what we perceive as necessary. So it's like a modifier to the math of what should happen. It doesn't always work out. Sometimes there's things that where the math says this and it doesn't work that way, but typically it does work that way. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. So in this case, if you go back to the Battle of Nations, well, there he's kind of trapped. Go back to Borodino. You see this, where something seems to have happened to Napoleon, where he no longer runs the battles that way. Now he's trying here. So by splitting his army, it's a smaller army, he splits it, one to go to Ligny and one to go to Quatre Bras, right? That's the old Napoleon. But something's happened that he didn't typically do that. And at Ligny, we're about to show you, he does none of that. I mean, it is just bludgeoning hammer blows in, which is great if you have superior numbers, but if you're already outnumbered, it's not really a great strategy. It was the one he thought he needed to employ, and he wins. But my point of this is to say, there's something about being willing to go into battle quickly that is an important aspect of how these things unfold. And Ney, and then later Napoleon, we'll show you in a second, Ney doesn't. Ney could have basically, by most military historians' accounts, could have swept through Quatre Bras before Wellington even gets there. And then would have forced Wellington to have to think at that moment, what do I do? Because, let me go back to here. Because it's harder to see on this map, but basically, if they took Brussels, then the British supply line was at risk. So remember, another aspect of military stuff is armies fight on their stomachs, right? When Grant cut off his supply line to go around Vicksburg, it was a huge risk. Because everybody's like, how are you going to feed everybody? There's not a McDonald's nearby. And so you need to have a supply line. And so Wellington would have had to, more than likely, would have had to pull back this direction, meaning further from the Prussians. That's in Napoleon's mind. Does that make sense for everybody? So further separating them. And for whatever reason, Ney doesn't do it. He was very cautious. He waited. And by the time he does attack at 2 p.m., Wellington's there, more British reinforcements are there, and the battle is fought to a draw. Okay? Now, at the exact same time this is happening, the battle attack at Ligny is happening. And as I told you, what Napoleon does there is sort of just a ramming effect, which is not old Napoleon. It's not looking for the way to make your maneuvers. There's no really sweeping movements like he had done before. This could be a whole day to itself. We're into Waterloo now, of course. So just understand that there's more that happens there, where there's moments where I think Napoleon could have made some different choices that would have better positioned him and better accomplished what he thought was supposed to happen, what he wanted. What he wants is one or both armies off the chessboard or far enough away they can't help each other. That's what he wants. Right? He thought after this battle that he had done it. They had lost more troops than the French had. Blücher himself was wounded. He had thought he was going to get help from the Brits, the Allied army, but they couldn't get there because they were caught up at Quatre Bras. He basically saves his army by leading a final cavalry charge, and then his horse gets shot out from under him. He gets wounded, the horse falls on him. The French almost run over him, and then he's saved with a counter move, and they take him back, which that's also important relative to what happens at Waterloo. Might have been a different story for the Prussians had he died at that moment. In Napoleon's mind, we've won enough. We can make do with where we are. Now, what's really important to see, though, is this is how battlefields get very, very confusing. because the French should have been able to win an ultimate victory on this day at least over one of the two. But as often happens in battles, you had an army group basically get lost. So the French First Corps under D'Aulon, right here, they were given orders, they were with Ney, they were given orders to go to Ligny to be with Napoleon, and they start coming into that battle, and they were on basically what would have been the right flank of the Prussians, and they marched for another 30 minutes, they could have gone into attack. Had they attacked, most military historians say the Prussian defeat would have been more severe, and, back to this map for a second, what's going to happen, this one. As you can see here, after this battle, Blücher takes his army north. Napoleon assumed he would go east towards Prussia, that he would retreat. Well, he misunderstood Blücher's mentality, and when he sends Grouchy after him, you see Grouchy basically goes the wrong way, and he loses touch. They get about 15 hours apart from each other, which means Grouchy's 30,000 troops are now to some off the map, off the battlefield kind of a thing, right? But if this army, if this corps had been able to come in, you can see it a little better here, because this is where there's Quatre Bras, here's Ligny, right? So the first corps comes in this direction, see that little dotted line, and then turns around. If they had attacked there, it would have helped push Blücher and the Prussians back to the east as opposed to going north. But when they got to about 30 minutes out, everybody's like, what are you doing here? And they're like, oh! So he turns around and marches back over to Ney. By the time he gets there, that battle's over. Had he just marched into the Battle of Quatre Bras, it's pretty clear that the British would have had a much deeper beating, perhaps to the complete collapse of that army, which then opens up Brussels, and it would have allowed Napoleon to kind of just deal with Blücher on another day, now with his army defeated, kind of a thing. But that doesn't happen, and that happens a lot in some battles. I mean, again, if you go back to Gettysburg, the missing cavalry units for Robert E. Lee was quite significant. The death of Stonewall Jackson plays a role in there also. Okay, so where are we? We're here. Yeah. All right. So this one. So Wellington finds out. Okay, the Prussians are defeated, but he gets word. So yeah, he gets word here from Blücher. We're in good shape. I mean, okay, yeah, we lost, but we're okay, and we're coming. We're coming north. Where are you? And Wellington announces to him, well, I pulled back towards Brussels, but I found the Mont Saint-Jean Ridge. When you hear ridge, and then you go to battlefields, you can be really discouraged. So back to Gettysburg again. Cemetery Ridge, you've heard of those places? If you go to Gettysburg, you would go, that's like a slope. So it is like a slope. If you stand there and you look and you get down and you do some real good, you can get the idea. But if, particularly for Floridians, and you think of what is a mountain or a ridge, and you think of the Appalachians, and you think of the Rockies, it's not that. It's just a sloping terrain, okay? But that's good enough to be battlefield helpful to the British. And Wellington had developed in all these battles in the Iberian Peninsula a very unique strategy that some of the French generals tried to warn Napoleon about. Napoleon's like, y'all are afraid. You're afraid of Wellington. I'm not afraid of Wellington. And what he did was he would position his infantry on the back side of the ridge. Now again, so don't think of steep hill, just think of a slope, right? And the point of that is that if you pull back far enough, now maybe the slope's to where only my head is available, right? I can still get killed, right? I can still have a cannonball come at me, but there's some protection, and depending on where the troops are, you can even have them further basically hidden from the sight of your enemy who's way over there looking, and all you see is the ridge, and you don't see those troops because they're down. They're not on their hands and knees or anything, or they might be seated, but you get the point. But it protects them, and it protects them from artillery. Artillery is really the queen of the battlefield in the sense of dealing with infantry. And Napoleon had a really good artillery unit. So Wellington's thinking, how do I position myself here? So he knows he's got this happening. He knows he's got the Prussians coming. Grouchy is going to deal with, Blücher deals with Grouchy by leaving 1/3 of his army, the Third Corps. He leaves them behind at Wavre. And he's like, okay, you stay here. This leads to a whole, when you get into the what ifs. Grouchy is one of the big ones where you're like, what happened to this guy? He screwed the whole thing up. Okay, so here we go. Napoleon, as you can see, outnumbers the British, 72 to 68. Definitely more cannons, so it's okay. Wellington's got this position of how he's going to hide people that I just told you about. Ultimately, realize in battles, a lot always depends, the math formula, who's doing the attacking and who's doing the defending, and then where the terrain is and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes it's to your advantage to be the attacker, but sometimes it's to your advantage to not be the attacker. All right? So in this case, Wellington knows we can sit here all day. We don't have to attack. We're not going to attack. Because I know what Napoleon doesn't know, that 40 to 50,000 Prussian troops are on their way. They'll be here before the end of the day. So then he's screwed. Napoleon doesn't know that, but he does know he doesn't have time to linger. He's got to figure out a way to get to Wellington. Now the battlefield of Waterloo is laid out, make sure I'm okay on time. Okay, here we go. The battlefield of Waterloo is laid out again on the Mont Saint-Jean Ridge, which is here, the slope, right? But to the front of this line are three positions. And you can see them here, here, and here, all right? So to the Allied right, which is, again, here, left on our map, right, is Hougoumont, all right? So the Chateau Hougoumont, La Haye-Saint is in the center, and then Papelotte is to the far. These are farms, but they had enough building terrain, so there's a building, and most of them had a wall around the land. So I'll show you the map in a second. That would be it's not fair to call it a fort, but nonetheless, if you're attacking me and I got a wall between me and you and you're out in the open, I have the advantage. Right? You got to be a really good shot to pick my head off. I got your whole body walking towards the wall. All right, so this is very effective for the British to have these positions because, go back to here, by having the three positions forward, any French attack, and the French have to attack, would have to come in between those positions or they have to attack those positions. If you attack the positions in the front, then Wellington could counterattack to you, or if you just say, well, screw it, we're just going to go between them, you're going to get enfilading fire from the sides on you all the way to the main line. The main line is what you need to get to, but you got to deal with these. So, and remember, Napoleon can't see really all the British troops because now Wellington has hidden his troops. Is everybody with me so far? Okay, so this is how it looks. It's not a great picture from the way it's showing you here. So here's the British lines, like this. There's Hougoumont, there's La Haye-Saint, and there's Papelotte. Right? This road here is the road going through the French lines back down to Quatre Bras and this way to Brussels, up that way. Waterloo's like back here, right? So the French are here confronting this. Napoleon decides this is where we got to go. We got to deal with Hougoumont. Because La Haye-Saint, if you attack here, you're attacked from both sides. And he doesn't feel strong enough to go to Papelotte, not at first. Papelotte happened to be the least defended of the three. You may go, why? Well, because Wellington knows that's the direction the Prussians are going to come. So in his mind, I can load up on this side because the Prussians are coming. And he's gambling, obviously, because they may not come. But that's what he's gambling on. Napoleon doesn't know that, of course. So what Napoleon should have done is attack over here, but he doesn't. He attacks here. So what he says he wanted to do was a feint, meaning I'm going to try to attack the farm to threaten that flank. And by threatening that flank, it'll make Wellington weaken his center to defend the flank. Does that make sense? If you are Civil War fans, you're like, that sounds vaguely familiar. Because that is the same idiotic plan that Lee thought of at Gettysburg. It's an impossible plan that never had a chance of working. In Gettysburg, you were dealing with a fortified central line. Napoleon doesn't have a fortified central line, but you still have a strongly defended central line. You're never going to be able to march troops across open ground and survive with enough numbers to pull that off, to punch through a line. And there again, we should say to ourselves, why is Napoleon trying to punch through a line when he's the master of maneuvering? Like I said, I feel like something's happened to Napoleon in my opinion, that has altered his previous strategies, tactical genius on the battlefield. In any case, that's what he thinks he's going to do, all right? Now, Napoleon waits for the ground to dry. It had rained the day before, so the march up. There's something to say, well, he should have attacked the next day. So there's a day of attacks at Quatre Bras-Ligny, then a pause day, then Waterloo. Now, see, he should have attacked the next day, but it was raining, and he was getting his army together. So the rain hampered the movement to the British. Then the next day, it's sunny, it's pretty, but it's like, if we march out on this field, it's all gooey, we should just let it dry. Now, of course, in hindsight, it's easy to criticize Napoleon for this because we know the Prussians are coming. But he doesn't know that. He is convinced they were either A, defeated and off in retreat, and he's not followed up, he's not sent somebody to find out. And B, he's left Grouchy to deal with them. And in his mind, even though on numbers the Prussians have a larger force, their having been defeated, their morale and their ability to fight would have been decreased. So Grouchy's 30,000, if they couldn't defeat the Prussians, could at least lock them down, right? So he's either going to rile them up and defeat them, or at least just keep them busy while I destroy the British. Then I'll come help you if there's any Prussians left, right? So I think we can't give Napoleon too much of a hard time at that point. So he's going to make the attack. So this is Hougomont, right? This is the map of Hougomont. Here's the actual kind of, let me go to this and I'll come back. So there's the grounds, and then there's this 9 to 10 foot wall out here around the formal gardens. Back here, formal garden, right there. So it's actually, if you think of the Alamo, it's in that vein. Like the Alamo's not a fort, but it's a defensive position. Turned out to be a poor one. But nonetheless, you get the picture. There's defensive terrain. So back to the math experiment, you've now added, you can have a lot less people here defending against a larger attacking force and probably hold out. Because it would take a lot of them to try to kill one of you because you're protected by walls and stuff. All right? And then there's woods here, which you've got the other day, there's not there, but there was a formal old-fashioned forest, which meant that any French cannons up here could not fire directly this way. So either Napoleon had to not use cannons at all, which initially that's what he does, or he's going to have to divert attacking the British line back here to attack this way, because you can't get through the woods. I mean, you could, but you're going to be wasting cannon fire trying to shoot through the woods in that process. Then back here, this is the road back to the farm, and it's a sunken lane. If you were here when we did Antietam, or if you've ever studied any old-fashioned battlefield, any battlefield for that matter, if the defender can be in the equivalent of a trench and the enemy or the other guys are walking on open ground, the person in the trench has the advantage. So that sunken lane will come into play. Won't be as big as it was at Shiloh and at Antietam, but it's in the same ballpark if you know those battles. All right, so there we go. So the battle begins. Jerome, Napoleon's brother, leads the attack on that side. He's not the commanding officer, but he leads the attack for the troops that are going in. Takes them about an hour to get through the garden, and when they do, you can't see it here, but the woods are like back here, like down here on the where I'm at. So there's about, like I said, it's about a 20-yard open space. They don't have any kind of ladders, so they can't scale the walls. So they basically come out in the woods into an open killing ground because they can't get to the other guys, and they're trying to figure out how to find some way to protect themselves. So it's not good for the French, is the best way to put it. Eventually, around 12:30, they are able to successfully kind of make their way through the other side and get around the wall back here and get into this area. This will be when Wellington does divert two, basically, brigade units to come to the sunken lane. They're able to kind of stymie this attack and hold them out of this area. And as you can see, the French will have to basically retreat. So the initial attack, which Napoleon said was diversionary, meaning he doesn't mean it to be an all-engagement. He just wants Wellington to move troops. Wellington does move some troops, but not really enough troops to kind of get us there. Then 15 minutes later or so, they tried again. This time, they went further around to kind of go around the back wall of these are the grounds here. There's the formal garden. To go around the back wall, and about 50 French troops discover on the back side that the back gate had been left open. Now, it wasn't left open, it was intentionally open because that was the route of supplies in and out of the, I'll call it a fort, out of the fort. So they wanted it to stay open so troops could come in and out, or people on horseback and wagons could come in pretty easily. The French discover it and get in. Now, there's only about 50 of them. And unfortunately for the French, they didn't have any nearby troops to follow up that attack. Initially, they get in and the British are not even looking because the battle's this way. So they're here and all of a sudden people are getting shot from behind. Like, ah! They turn around and there's 50 French. And so British troops from all around there, some in some buildings there, some in the other area, some in another building on this side, all kind of converge. And there's really a vicious sort of hand-to-hand battle combat that occurs between these small number of men, with one of the British officers finally being able to reach the gate and close the gate behind them, which of course meant all the French are going to die. And that was kind of a really risky moment. There's one other moment that's similar. They find another way into this gate, but that gets closed off really quickly. This is the moment where you could say the whole battle really hinges. Had the French planned this, I don't really think they planned to go. They just were like fighting their way. Go back to this for a second. They're kind of fighting their way down here. They're looking for a way in, and some of them go, oh, look at that. Had they really been like designing the attack, they clearly could have had 200, 300, 500 other soldiers to follow in, and then it would have been over for the British inside there. Would have been a vicious still battles to go, but more than likely would have pulled off. So the point of this is that Hougomont is saved, and the French are not able to get, Napoleon's not able to get what he wants, which is Wellington moving his troops. 1:30 comes. Napoleon's beginning to get a little nervous, so he decides we're going to make an attack to the right center of the British line. This is the First Corps, who didn't fight the day before, so they should have been fresh. Same thing Lee does with Pickett. Pickett hadn't fought in the days previous because he'd been further away from Gettysburg. When he finally gets there at the end of day 2, Lee's like, rest, we'll use you tomorrow. So his troops are fresh. Same thing here with the First Corps. So he sends them into battle between Lyson and Papillon. So he's sending them that way. He's not trying to go necessarily between. It's sort of like we're going to attack all that and go in that direction. And they do. The problem is there's just not enough of them to make this a successful attack at this moment. The British line is still fairly strong, and those two central points, the Central Farm and Papillon, are both strong, and they've not really been engaged. They've had cannon fire, but they've not really had anything attacking them. So they're in really strong position. They are making some progress, and at this moment, Wellington unleashes his cavalry. So the cavalry come riding over the hill of the ridge and crash into the center of the French line and destroy it. And if you've ever again studied military or looked at some movies, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, the Ride of the Rohirrim, you get that picture of horses at a full gallop, kind of scary, and so they're effectively able to charge in. Unfortunately for the British, they're also hard to maintain a charge and keep it under control because, it's the chaos of battle. So they were so successful that they destroy the French attack, and starts retreating back, and they keep going. And so then Napoleon unleashes his cavalry as well as artillery and utterly obliterates the British cavalry. Now there's some left, of course. So kind of even Steven here. The First Corps of the French now off the battlefield, playing chess, that piece is gone. The British cavalry, that piece is gone. Okay, now what's happening, I don't have it up here, but at this moment, Prussian troops start to arrive in small numbers. Napoleon's not really made aware of it yet, but he's not worried when he hears about it, because again, he thinks his guys got it under control. Okay? So, famous charge here of the British cavalry. So now, Napoleon sends more troops to Hougomont. Now this is interesting, and it's not clear. Is Napoleon changing his mind from diversion to central point of attack? Has Napoleon lost control of the battlefield? He doesn't really know what he's doing. Or was Hougomont kind of a central location of attack from the beginning? It's not really clear, at least in my mind, which one Napoleon's really trying to do. But it shows that, particularly if it was meant as diversion, Napoleon's changed his mind and now sees this is important. So now he trains his cannons on Hougomont and basically says, We need to attack it from cannon fire, set it on fire, blow it up. That's what's there's a small number of troops there. It does catch on fire. Wellington does send some troops in aid and supplies. At one point, the troops inside the farm basically were running out of bullets, and so some very brave supply wagon drivers got their supplies to the British inside Huguenot. When Wellington sees it on fire, he sends a message: you can't leave. You gotta stay. You have to hold this position. And Wellington later, in his opinion, says Huguenot is the whole of the battle. The battle, which said later it's a very close run thing, the battle really hinges right there. Like that's the moment, that's the location that he's winning this battle, although it's still very close. Remember, he's outnumbered compared to Napoleon before the Prussians get there. And as you can see, the French will now put overall up to 14,000 troops into that area, which could maybe have swung the battle had they taken it. But when you know the whole of Waterloo, it begins to make you wonder if that's a misallocation of forces. Particularly since the British, even though there are 12,000 here, they're not 12,000 fighting in that area. He's got his troops on the line, but they're involved, but they're not in that part of the battle. There's probably no more than like 3,000 or 4,000 troops there on site fighting against the French troops. The British troops that are there are outnumbered, but they have the greater supply of protection in the process. So here's where we are at this point. So it's about one or so. There's Huguenot. This was D'Erlon's first corps trying his attack between Papillon, which is basically here, and La Sainte right here. That gets turned back by the cavalry attack. We get to 4. At 4, everything shifts. The Prussians show up in force. So Napoleon now realizes whatever happened to Blücher, I don't know, but he's not here, and I got to deal with this. So he has one reserve group, not his Imperial Guard, but his one normal reserve group, and he sends them to meet them. Initially, it's not as bad as it is here. By the end of the day, it's like 7,000 to 30,000. Remember, it's a math experiment. 7,000 are never going to hold out against 30,000. They might can hold out for a short while, but it's not 30,000 initially, but it's going to build. And Napoleon realizes, okay, I'm running out of time. At this point, on his own, from what we can tell, Marshal Ney feels like he sees an opening. So back here to this map. So here's Ney, right? And he wasn't that close to begin with, so he's back here. He feels like with the British movement here and all this attack here, he thinks he sees something. So he unleashes his own cavalry attack. Now again, I just told you cavalry can be kind of scary and thundering and all this kind of stuff, but not necessarily if you're riding into prepared positions. But the British saw him coming and were able to move into what was called defensive square. Now what that means, I'm going to go back and come forward. Right? Here's a picture. This is, they're not always this big, right? That's more of a depiction. But imagine I had all of you line up in lines, and then I said, get into a square. It would take us a while because, but we'd square based on the number of people we have, right? Now, the whole point about defensive square as it relates to cavalry is that the cavalry can still crash through your line of what would be 2 or 3 soldiers, but now they're in the middle of the square where you can shoot them. And because you have this kind of porcupine effect all the way around, there's less likelihood that the horses will want to charge through. So then what that leaves you with, if you're on horseback, is riding around. Which that means, particularly in a setting like this, where there's multiple squares, all you're getting done is getting shot while you're riding around in a big circle, not affecting the troops. I mean, you may be killing some of them also with saber or with pistol or whatever, but the real point of a cavalry charge is shock and awe, destroying the line and the cohesion of the line so that the line falls apart. But by being able to get in the square, all Ney did was put himself in a vulnerable position where he's just going to get shot to pieces, which is what happened. He also had no provision for having any infantry follow up, mostly because they're at Huguenot, as opposed to following him. And he didn't send word to Napoleon or to even his own artillery for his corps to have them really firing in effect. It's possible that he thought, I don't want friendly fire as a problem. I really think it was just he got greedy, he got aggressive and thought, okay, I'll just make this attack on my own. So That attack falters. So you get the picture, it's 4 p.m. We probably got 4 hours of daylight. Napoleon's here looking at the battlefield, and all of a sudden to his right, he doesn't see pieces, he sees full formations of the Prussian army, and then over to his left, he sees his cavalry leader, his cavalry troops charging off into an unsupported battle. Okay, I'm running out of time, and I'm into trouble. So, they keep fighting, they're still around. By 6, La Haye Sainte falls. The French are finally able to take it. But at this point, Napoleon's out of troops. He doesn't have anything except his famed guard units left that he could send. Blücher's nowhere to be, Blücher's nowhere to be found. He's not around the battlefield. Now another Prussian army is coming basically at Papillon, which they had also been in the process of taking at that moment, but they didn't have time to get in there and set up their own defensive perimeter. So the Prussians are now coming, and Napoleon realizes, I'm in trouble. So he sends in the Imperial Guard. So the Imperial Guard is kind of this lore-filled unit that, it's a little bit of a stretch, but I hope, it's like the SS was on the World War II battlefield. When Allied troops, Russian, British, American, knew they were fighting the SS, there was a clear sense of these are the best possible opponents. They had great, all the intangibles to hold up under battle. They'd been in significant battles. They had the best weapons. The Imperial Guard is in that vein. According to lore, they had never lost a battle, never retreated from a battle. They weren't often used in battles, or they were usually used in mop-up at the end. Occasionally they were used in serious moments. They'd start off as bodyguard units. Then over the years, they had gotten more people. You had to survive several campaigns to be in. And by this point, it was a fairly large structured unit, although after the first abdication, they weren't around as much. But there was the old guard, the ones who'd been alive the longest. There was the middle guard, there was the young guard, the newest ones, to these units. And so Napoleon's like, okay, I got to do this. It wasn't his preferred tactic, but he sends them in to march, and by 7 p.m., they're into battle. Somewhere, it's hard to get the numbers right, 2,500 to 4,000 march into battle. Again, just think of Pickett's charge. You're marching against prepared positions with artillery who's ready, who are still there. They haven't been blown out by the French artillery. The Allied army is more ragtag than the Union army at the center of the Gettysburg line, but they're still significantly in line, and they're able to begin attacking. At a couple of key moments, British troops, some on their own, so this is a Dutch division here, are able to move on their own, meaning they weren't being engaged in battle, and flank. And by attacking a flank of a unit, you then are you're in a superior position compared to them. And so the attack basically fails to do what it needed to do, which is in a sense try to cause the British line to falter and fall apart on its own. And so all of a sudden, word begins to spread that the Guard was retreating. Now, so the Guard starts retreating. The Prussians are coming at the front, so the First Corps, and they attack and retake Papillon. And then back to the rear, the first Prussian group that got there forward now is that 30,000 over 7,000. And the entire French army breaks into, it's not fair to call it a rout, but in a very strong retreat. Some of the remaining units of the Guard who had not been used themselves formed square to hold out and in essence fought to their deaths, allowing what was left of the French army to make their way away. Napoleon himself basically escaped on horseback. He was in his carriage, and it was very clear because Wellington had ordered an advance. So it's very clear, you're not getting away fast enough, so he gets off on horseback, and later Wellington and Blücher will meet at Napoleon's headquarters, which is this painting here. Somebody will capture and find an annotated copy of Machiavelli's The Prince. That was Napoleon's personal copy, and the Battle of Waterloo is coming to an end. At that, Napoleon makes his way back, hopes he can start over. By this point, the government he had set up, the Chamber of Deputies, they're like, handwriting's on the wall, we're getting out of here alive. So they turn on him, Talleyrand and the Bourbon government is involved here. And so basically, they force him to abdicate. So June 24th, 7th abdication. Napoleon is not captured. He sort of is allowed to wander off. It's kind of a wonder curiosity, mostly because there aren't any Allied armies there yet in France or Paris. He kind of wanders off, and he's trying to figure out what to do. And so he concludes on his own that he is going to actually go to the British, thinking they would be maybe the most magnanimous. He wanted to go maybe to America, maybe go to Australia. And the British were like, we're glad you're here. You're not going anywhere nice. And so once he gets on the Belgium, he thinks they're going to, he says, this is what he wrote, basically, I've placed myself under the protection of their laws, the most powerful, most constant, most generous of my enemies. And they're going to send him way down here. They're not going to let him stick around. So Napoleon comes to his end at St. Helena. He'll live there and die there. I had a few more slides about the Congress of Vienna, but because we're short on time, I think I'm going to stop there and just say Waterloo comes to an end. They'll meet at the Congress of Vienna. They'll work through their differences. They'll set up what becomes a peace agreement that we typically call the Concert of Europe. It's fragile, depending on who's counting. It lasted 99 years. I will tell you it lasted like 30 years. But nonetheless, they set up this whole process. And this next World War that we had comes to its end. And with that, I'll pause and stop and see if you have any questions you'd like to ask before you get out of here. I think I hear thunder also. But any questions you'd like to ask about the Battle of Waterloo and what's going on? I'm going to skip forward to the slide that shows you what's next. Oh, I didn't want to show you this one, but I'll let you read while I see if there's any questions. It's okay if there's not. Yes, sir.
So the British were fighting two fronts then at that time that they were here in 1812, or like that.
Yeah, Waterloo happens after they had already signed the Treaty of Ghent with us in December of 14.
So maybe some of those soldiers came and
but
fighting over here.
Packingham, who I showed you, had that conversation with Wellington. He is sent over in December to lead what will be the Battle of New Orleans in January. So the best way to put it is that there were maybe 30 to 40,000 British troops who were key veterans from the Peninsula campaign in the Iberian Peninsula who were in the United States and were not available. But they would have been available had the battle kept going.
Okay.
He's asking about where they are fighting two fronts. They certainly were fighting two wars, although from the British point of view, fighting us was kind of like a fly around an elephant. It's like, you're bothering me. Why did you start this war? We don't have time for you. It's a very curious war to examine. It's a good war. It's a fun thing to say for U.S. history point of view. But they did, as you're saying, send away troops who were in North America and not in Europe. Yes, sir.
So within 6 months, they lost at New Orleans, where they were the French attacking the Americans behind the barricades.
Yeah, the British attack in New Orleans.
British attacked and lost, and 6 months later, it was the French attacking a well-placed British outfit.
Yes.
I guess they learned.
Yeah. You'd think that military commanders would recognize attacking prepared positions as unwise, but sometimes, I guess, I've never been there, so I can't act like I know.
Did Packingham die in New Orleans?
Yes, he dies in New Orleans. Packingham dies in New Orleans. Yeah, he's killed in the battlefield. And the second in command's killed in the battlefield there too. So he literally was only there for like 3 weeks.
At New Orleans, they really had no choice.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's right. He said at New Orleans they had no choice. It is similar to the story at Waterloo in that Napoleon would say, I have to attack. I can't not attack. And the British down there. Now, of course, had Packingham known about the Treaty of Ghent, he might have said, all right, let's get on the boats, boys. We're heading home. But of course, nobody knew that kind of a thing. This is the upcoming things. I really appreciate you guys. Make sure you stop on the way out and talk to the Jane Austen Society. Give them your information if you don't know. I'd love to see you at any of our other talks. And of course, many, many wonderful things we do here at the library. I see you taking pictures, and I'm going to show you one last slide. If you want to ever talk to me, you can by email. I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you. Have a great day.